The MCU used to put its characters front and center. It was never perfect, but it stood out from other movies in the genre. And when instead of one movie, you have 30 movies to develop these characters, you can create real magic. From the second Tony Stark was reborn in that cave, he was so obsessed with saving people that it literally ruined his life. From tanking his company to ruining his personal relationships because he was building suits, to developing PTSD, to ruining his personal relationships because he was building more suits, to developing an AI that almost destroyed the world, to chasing Thanos into space, to developing time travel, to finally sacrificing his life. Tony Stark's story has always been about this one line from Pepper that almost makes me cry every time I see it because it's filled with 10 years of character development.
Tony, trying to get you to stop has been one of the few failures of my entire life.
You would think that Marvel would understand that even if the plots are convoluted, the CGI is garbage, the science and magic systems aren't given even the smallest semblance of rules, and the interconnectivity is non-existent, that this would be the one thing that they understood that they had to get right. And yet, for some reason, time and time again, they take our favorite characters and drag them through the mud to serve whichever third act action set piece happens to be on the agenda for that day. It's infuriating. And it happens so much that I'm going to chronicle it. All of it, right now, here today. And so, without further ado, I introduce you to how Marvel ruined, forgot about, or otherwise disrespected almost every major character in Phase 4, or as I like to call it, the roast of MCU Phase 4 characters. WandaVision was a beautiful rumination on grief and redemption, where Wanda's love for Vision and Vision's pure-hearted robot goodness were so great that even a fake version of him that she created convinced her to stop doing evil stuff, even if it meant she had to watch her loved ones die around her again. Vision reminded her of her humanity, and even though she had done unspeakable acts that she would need to atone for, that made her all the more compelling as an anti-hero on the path to redemption. That is, until the executives at Marvel didn't think it was important for the writers on her next project to even watch WandaVision, let alone continue it. You can say that the Darkhold corrupts everyone who uses it, and I will respond that may be true, but it's infinitely less interesting than the complex character we lost. Vision also had a great showing in WandaVision, where writer Jack Schaefer redeemed him from multiple years of getting his ass kicked, reminding us that Vision is special not because of his lasers or his strength, but his overwhelming goodness, exceptional empathy, and love for humanity and Wanda. Which made it all the more offensive that he was basically erased from the next chapter in her story, inexplicably not looking for her while she was simultaneously not looking for him. Hello, WandaVision went with sitcoms because it was about marital love and a family dynamic. I'm sure that White Vision is off finding himself somewhere, but wherever it is, it better be damn important. At the beginning of WandaVision, Monica is perfectly set up to be a foil and new best friend to Wanda. Someone who is also dealing with grief and who also channels emotions destructively, but who can remind her that moving on is not about living in the past, but about forging new bonds and learning to live again. That is, until Wanda finally gives her the moment to plead her case, the moment where Monica can show Wanda the light, the moment she's been waiting for, and Monica says,
"What do you want?"
"What do you want? What do you want?" Your entire character's journey has led to this exact moment. This is literally the climax of her arc in the first half of the show, and it ends with Wanda ignoring her because she wastes her one moment to say something useful. Wanda's like, "All right, Monica, let's hear your plan." And Monica's all like,
"I got nothing for you, Cap. I got no coordinates, no clues, no strategies, no options, zero, zip, nada."
And aside from that, she kind of does nothing. She argues throughout the entire show that the best way to beat Wanda is with kindness. They lay a ton of groundwork hinting that Monica will help Vision snap Wanda out of it, like casting her as Wanda's sitcom best friend, establishing that Wanda subconsciously trusts her, and even having her help deliver Wanda's children. But she doesn't actually get to help redeem Wanda, so by the end of the show, she doesn't really have much to do. They just give her lasers, and suddenly her strength comes not from her big heart, but from her lasers. Aside from that, Monica is ineffective as the plan she works on for multiple episodes to get into Westview completely fails, negligent as that plan failing almost gets her friends killed, and foolhardy as she decides to not check on her friends but run into the Hex anyway with zero new information about why it would work. Good thing it ended up giving her powers instead of killing her. She must have known that was going to happen, which is why she did it, right? It's genuinely nice to see that Darcy and Jimmy have leveled up off screen. Unfortunately, they don't get to level up on screen. These two have nothing to do except move the plot and deliver one-liners. And by the end, Darcy's contributions have nothing to do with her astrophysics degree and everything to do with her driving? Agatha is mostly good. I like her. Evil, but there's a nugget of genuine care in there for Wanda. There's something tragic about her that's actually refreshing for an MCU villain. But unfortunately, because of the Darkhold or whatever, none of that depth ever gets to come out. In the end, she's just plain evil. She still works fine as the final villain of WandaVision, but I had hoped for more. Billy and Tommy are adorable, and using classic sitcom tropes to develop their characters is such a creative and fun choice. These kids are basically Drake and Josh, the fun one and the feelsy one. They don't really get to do much though. It starts to look like we're about to get a fun side adventure featuring Monica and the twins, but instead we get this. There's a lot of promise with these two, but by the end, the most interesting thing about them is Wanda's choice to sacrifice them. Someone please tell me why the very first scene in this show has Sam teaming up with the people Steve spent years of his life opposing. Sam went back to the military? Don't get me wrong, this could have been interesting commentary, especially in a political thriller, but this is just presented completely without question. And then that same episode literally becomes about how Sam can't trust the government, and still this scene is presented completely without question. How can you make a show about a government being evil and betraying someone and not address the fact that that someone works for the military arm of that government? Overall though, Sam's arc in Falcon and the Winter Soldier is about growing into the Captain America role, a role that's not defined by your muscles or your race, but by your ability to bring people together and have them trust you as a leader. Sam is at his best when he's talking Karli into reevaluating her life choices and inspiring the world with moving monologue. Yes, that scene is cringe, but it does wonders for Sam's character and firmly establishes him as a new symbol that the people of the world can get behind. Unfortunately, the show has such a convoluted plot that this thread gets lost for multiple episodes at a time, only rearing its head in small bursts. We're sort of supposed to infer that Sam learns what it means to be Captain America through his relationships to Bucky, John, Zemo, Isaiah, and Karli, but to be honest, most of the actual time spent with his character over the course of the 6 episodes is not really about that at all. For every one interesting scene, there seems to be 3 boring ones, where characters spout exposition or fight for vague reasons. And because of that wasted time, Sam has to level up into Captain America with a literal training montage right before the finale. Also, while being Cap isn't defined by your muscles, they are important, and him losing to a guy in the finale that Cap beat in his opening scene is pretty weak. If you're going to give him a new suit and new tech, you have to show how that makes up for his lack of super strength. At least have them tie. Bucky is easily the most offensive character in this show. The show sets up an unbelievably moving premise for him in episode 1. A man who is so haunted by his actions that guilt has driven him to make friends with the father of the innocent man he killed. A friendship that's all the more powerful when you realize that Bucky is an old man too. This had the potential to be the most heartrending plot thread in all of Phase 4. After episode 1, this thread gets basically no meaningful development until right before the finale, where Sam teaches him in literally 56 seconds that redemption is not about him, but about the people that he hurt. And then they tack on one conversation that lasts 35 seconds with Yori at the very end of the show. This show got 6 hours. Why does most of their development happen right before the finale? I feel like I'm back in undergrad, turning in my character development homework at midnight, 5 minutes before it's due. Bucky gets one other standout moment in the show with a flashback where Io breaks his brain control. Sebastian Stan's acting brings me to tears every time I watch this scene. But unfortunately, it's undercut by Bucky returning the favor by throwing the entire country of Wakanda under a bus. He releases their Osama bin Laden from prison because checks notes he might have some information about the people they're looking for. We were so eager to get Zemo into the action that we made Bucky look like a total asshole. And on that note, why is Bucky so weak? This man is the ultimate killing machine, and he's going toe-to-toe with these schmucks? I don't care who takes a super soldier serum. Have them train as an assassin for 7 decades and then come talk to me. And don't give me that crap about him not being able to fight as well just because he's Bucky, not the Winter Soldier. If the show actually delved into that explanation would be the perfect way to explore his grief and move along his forgotten character arc. But they don't do that. Here, we have the worst of both worlds. Bucky is way weaker, meaning the action is worse, and they don't even use that to drive his character's journey. 2014's The Winter Soldier feels like a dark world where being good and sticking to your virtues can never survive, which is why it's genius to use as the backdrop to play with virtuous characters like Steve and, at the time, Sharon. I will never forget when that young, nerdy, average Joe at the computer stood against Brock Rumlow in the face of death, and Sharon showed up to his defense saying, "Captain's orders." She's the perfect partner for Steve, although not romantically, that was weird. Always willing to break the law to do what she thinks is right, and always encouraging him to do the same. Which is why having her character do a complete 180 off-screen and become a cynical, villainous mafia boss is crazy. It is exactly the kind of choice that one makes when they want their plot to go a certain way without respecting what made these characters interesting. Of course, she could have a change of heart, but it would have to be done with care and for a compelling reason. What is that reason exactly? Because Steve Rogers, paragon of virtue, forgot about his good friend and partner, niece of the love of his life, the person who convinced him not to sign the Sokovia Accords, someone who lost everything she had in life to help him? He didn't think to get her a pardon with everyone else before going off to fondue with her aunt? Sam? Bucky? No one? Why are we rooting for these guys again? Good thing we're not going to see our beloved characters make horrible life-altering mistakes off-screen in Phase 5, right? Walker starts off so great because he represents the only result you could possibly have when you allow the US government to choose Captain America. As he and Lamar remind us, they got their medals and awards not because they were willing to question those in power, but because they were willing to serve those in power without question.
3 badges of excellence to make sure I never forget the worst day of my life.
That's both why he was chosen and why he could never be Captain America. He didn't lose the title because he killed someone. He lost the title because he got caught, and he knows it. Which is why Walker's
I am Captain America
is perfect. He is their Captain America because they chose him, whether they accept it or not. And this ominous delivery serves as the perfect turning point for him after a season of slowly losing his mind as he tries to step into a role that is the opposite of everything his training had taught him thus far. He's been made a stooge, and after 5 episodes of trying to fit a square into a circular hole, he's ready to go crazy. He's been set up as the perfect villain with compelling motivations, and he's one of the only parts of this entire political thriller TV show that represents an actual poignant political message. He is the perfect foil to Sam. And then he immediately has a change of heart, complete with him quipping it up with Bucky. Not only is this totally unearned, as he just beat a fleeing man to death like 72 hours ago, but it's also the infinitely less interesting choice, robbing us of one of the few actually compelling villains in this whole franchise, and also of a real long-term redemption arc that he could still go through. The Flag Smashers started by raising important questions like, is robbing a bank really that bad? And what are the long-term consequences of the governments of the world throwing people aside for short-term benefit? And then, of course, they start killing innocents. But to be honest, even before that, they had no coherent message or ideology. Karli feels like a caricature of a young radical, just kind of yelling vague slogans and using social justice-esque language. If you want to actually represent young radicals, you kind of have to go deeper than that. And I guess that's the point, because she is, as Falcon calls her,
or a misguided teenager.
I mean, you can go that route, but if you do, don't expect me to care anything at all about her character. Val is perfect. I love her. But so far, she narratively only exists to serve other characters and plotlines, which is fine, but I shudder at what will happen when she's the one in the spotlight. I would ask Marvel not to let me down, but at this point, it is inevitable. Isaiah Bradley is great in concept, but just okay in practice. His character arc is about being treated badly by America, rejecting the idea of a black man being Captain America because of this, learning to accept that Sam is redefining what the role means, and finally being honored by his recognition in the Captain America Museum. And on paper, that sounds fine, but in practice, his whole appearance is clearly more about making a political statement than anything else, and that would be fine, but here, it's just too preachy in form, yet uninspired in content to be anything more than surface-level political commentary. Isaiah's justification for opposing Sam being Captain America is very much the Twitter soundbite version of this conversation, referencing broad, popular concepts, but without actually digging into what those criticisms mean. Disney tackles political commentary because they're trying to win internet points. I'd rather them just not. It makes me think about the anti-Semitism and the child labor and the whole ruining artistic freedom thing. You don't talk about how you're evil, I pretend I don't know you're evil. It works, Disney, at least for a few hours at a time. Don't ruin a good thing here. Okay, so for the next few, I have to warn you that while I have complaints about the projects overall, I must admit that the character work is not bad. So yeah, the title is kind of a lie. But after these, we get to get into the ones that really bother me, so stick with me here. Despite my misgivings at how sloppily they treated the rest of the characters when shoehorning Zemo into this show, I can't really be mad about his character. He has one belief: superhumans are too powerful to live unchecked. And every action he makes in the show is in service of this. This culminates in a high-tension scene where we get to see what he actually does when he has access to super soldier serum, and he actually destroys the serum. He's not changed, but he is forced to make a choice to define who he is, and he makes it. It's simple, and I would have liked to see him do more, but I guess it works for the role he's playing in this show. Character-wise, Loki is mostly done justice here. In just one episode, they find a way to take 2012 Loki and break him down enough that he has a change of heart and becomes a sympathetic character again. It's a marvelous feat that I would have bet was impossible, considering we have to watch a show that's not about the Loki we all fell in love with. But choosing to use the Infinity Stones to be the final breaking point is a really inspired choice here. I believe that it's enough to make Loki face the truth. He is not the greatest power in the universe. This is the greatest power in the universe, and it hired Owen Wilson to tell him that he's a loser. And Hiddleston's performance as Loki slowly breaks down and faces the truth he's been ignoring his entire life can still, you guessed it, make me cry. The show takes this a bit too far, with him guffawing at the fact that they were going to let people die on Lamentus, as if he wasn't gleefully murdering people like 4 days ago. And I also don't appreciate him going from catching arrows and moving buildings with his mind to being thrown out of windows by common guards, but it hits the beats it needs to hit. I feel similarly about Sylvie. I go back and forth on whether the episode where they fall in love is cliche, corny, and meandering, or if screwing things up and arguing about nothing is exactly how two Lokis should fall in love. I never quite buy that the shift from hating each other to falling in love happens that quickly, and the journey is otherwise bumpy in other ways, but by the end, when they have their final kiss in the middle of a fight that's based on the fact that he's always chased power while she's always tried to tear it down, I kinda buy it. And I like that she sticks to her guns in the end, but that she doesn't feel super happy with her decision after it's over either. That's interesting. I don't love all the beats in the middle, but I like where it eventually ends up. Mobius is great. Sometimes he has to make stupid decisions because the plot needs him to, but overall he's entertaining, compassionate, and thoughtful. An everyman. And his arc of turning against the TVA is done well. He's perhaps most interesting when juxtaposed with his best friend, Renslayer, because we get to watch how differently she and Mobius deal with learning the truth about the TVA. He, with a stronger moral compass, believes that the fact that they've been lied to means that it's time to abandon the mission and embrace free will. She, as someone clinging a bit more to power, still wants to get to the bottom of the mystery, but assumes business as usual in the meantime. Both of them feel betrayed by the other. And both of them did get betrayed because each of them chose their ideals over their friendship, which is a conflict that almost always makes for interesting character work. It's not groundbreaking, but it works. Alright, I'll admit it, I like Natasha's arc in Black Widow. She has to face the fact that the years that she tried to push away are the same years that the person who looked up to her saw as the most precious years of her life. Yelena teaches her that they weren't a fake family. They were a real family because they really loved each other, and that's all that family really is. The action was cartoonish, the nose thing was stupid, but the movie does Natasha's character justice. Or it would have if it was in Phase 3. At this point, it's a bit too late. Alright, I know we've been on a roll of non-roasts here, but the streak ends after Yelena because she's the most interesting out of anybody we've talked about so far. At times, she's cool and menacing, and at others, she's funny and sweet, and she's at her best when she's both at the same time. Her belief that their family was real is the heart of the Black Widow movie.
The best part of my life was fake, and none of you told me.
And I want to zoom in on one of her scenes in Black Widow. The scene where she talks about her vest is so refreshing because it is just a silly MCU conversation, but it's not a conversation about nothing like in so many of the other movies where the banter is just vapid.
I've never had control over my own life before, and now I do. I want to do things.
I like your vest.
God, I knew it. I knew you did. It's so cool, right?
It's good.
Yes, and you can put so much stuff in there, you wouldn't even know.
Yes, Yelena is being funny, but we're also watching her develop a sense of agency for the first time in her life. And we're watching her seek her big sister's approval 2 decades later despite her too cool for school attitude. At this point, there's simply no excuse for Disney not knowing the difference between interesting banter and mindless banter. It's called character development, and it's why she's the standout when it comes to new characters in Phase 4. In Hawkeye, the way that she threatens Kate Bishop while unintentionally betraying that she's totally in need of female companionship after the death of her sister is hilarious and moving. And her fighting Kate with kid gloves because she likes the sport, wants to test how strong Kate is, and would never seriously harm a child is endearing for someone so dangerous and unpredictable, and is exactly why she's a good hero.
Thank you for the girls' night. Truly.
Oh, and Kate Bishop, do not get in my way again.
I will say, the fact that she was chasing down Clint based on false information is definitely a cop-out. It robs her of agency and conviction. There is only one way that story could have ever ended, with the entire weight of their conflict being resolved once the truth was ironed out. It was a lazy way to introduce Yelena to Kate and Clint, and it would have been much more interesting if they were fighting about something real. And trust me, with Clint, there's a lot to fight about. But we'll get to Clint. When I first saw Black Widow, I was upset at how they never gave Alexei his moment to shine. He gets his ass kicked by Taskmaster, and then he's basically written out of the movie without a chance to become anything more than comic relief. Upon rewatch though, I think it's deeper than that. Alexei might want to be as great as Captain America, but that's not what his arc was actually about, or at least not in the way he thinks. It's about recognizing that he's a self-centered asshole who threw 2 young girls who trusted him into the meat grinder just for a chance at glory. He doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence as Captain America. The tragedy of Red Guardian is not that he loses, but that they get one chance to let him face a version of his rival in the form of Taskmaster copying Captain America, and they didn't use this to teach him this lesson. He should lose, but instead of having Melina save him unceremoniously, he should have a realization that winning a fight or being stronger than Captain America is less important than saving his daughter, which up until that point seemed to be where they were taking the character.
Not a perfect soldier, but a good man.
And don't say they wanted to keep him as an anti-hero, because he does have that realization, he just doesn't quite get enough time to earn it. That said, despite everything, he's still a likable character, mainly because, as Natasha says, he's an idiot. He's complicit in unspeakable acts of torture against Natasha and Yelena, but it's so evident that he's not malicious, just stupid, that you can't help but understand why they forgive him. And while Alexei is an idiot, Melina is a coward. Natasha looking them in the eyes and telling them this is such an important moment for this movie because it's the moment where they're forced to face the truth about themselves. Melina, who's so broken and has been working for Dreykov for so long, is unable to imagine anything else and is uninterested in asking the important questions about her actions. Like Alexei, her change of heart isn't given room to breathe, but it still works. And being such great characters with dubious pasts makes the family message all the more poignant. This idiot and this coward allowed Dreykov to do horrible things to Natasha and Yelena. But the fact that Natasha and Yelena still accept them and help them to wipe out the red in their ledgers is interesting and complex, and speaks volumes about what their time as family meant to them. And by the way, don't take this as me weighing in on how you should respond to abusers in real life. Some people forgive their abusers and some don't. My point is just that either can be interesting in a movie if the reasons feel truthful to the characters. So let's get back to roasting, shall we? Taskmaster is not really a character, and that's okay, I guess. She gets agency at the end of the movie, so she can be a real character next time we see her. Here, she's just a cool concept brought to life in order to be a scary adversary for the heroes. Which means this movie introduces a villain who can beat for beat copy the moves of every other hero we've seen so far in the MCU, and she gets 1.5 action sequences. I know that Natasha chooses not to fight her, and I like that choice from Natasha in that moment, but from a filmmaking perspective, you can't just introduce the coolest concept ever and then not deliver. Like with Bucky, we're in the worst of both worlds here. No character and no coolness. And speaking of Natasha's decision, I think it does make Taskmaster less interesting when she's immediately embracing Natasha upon being freed. I know it services the themes of the movie, but with a character like this that they have no plan on exploring in the film, there's an element of mystery and danger about her outlook and intentions that might have been better if it were preserved going into the next project.
Space. Time. Reality. It's more than a link.
no, we're not doing this. No. Shang-Chi is the first of many Phase 4 movies and shows that I call their Hindenburg projects. The first half of this movie is the MCU at its best. I was crying within minutes at the beauty of the fight between Wenwu and Ying Li. Then there's the awesome bus scene, followed by the nightclub scene where Abomination, Wong, and the Widow Program all get shoutouts, followed by the absolutely gorgeous fight between Shang-Chi and the Death Dealer. I felt like a kid in a candy shop. The second half of the movie, I was forced to slowly watch and do nothing as it tragically ruined almost every good thing about the film, and every time I see it, it breaks my heart. Shang-Chi's character arc is extremely muddled and inconsistent. It's partly about him discovering his purpose in life, partly about him learning not to blame himself for his father's abuse, partly about him learning not to blame himself for his mother's death, partly about him learning to embrace the light and dark of his parents to form something new, and partly about him learning to face the mistake of leaving his sister. Any one of these could have been a compelling arc for Shang-Chi, but aside from that last one, each of these is brought up one or two times out of nowhere, and none of them get really resolved by the end of the movie, where everything is thrown out of the window for the spectacle of a giant kaiju fight. By the end, I guess he does learn to discover his purpose in life, but only in the sense that he now has superpowered rings that make him an Avenger. I mean, literally, that's the full circle moment where he comes back to his friends and is able to prove that he's changed. Not because he's learned anything, but because he has badass powers now and his life is way cooler than theirs. Learning to embrace the light of his mother and the dark of his father sounds nice, but doesn't actually mean anything in the context of the narrative. His father's ambition and his mother's restraint, his father's calculated strategizing and his mother's on-the-spot flexibility and improvisation. In actuality, the only place where it almost means something is his combat style, where he combines the 10 rings of his father with his mother's style of fighting. But isn't that just his mother's style of fighting, given that she controlled the 10 rings too? And moreover, the fact that he's able to master her fighting style to the point where he mimics their exact fight beat for beat and steals the rings after one training session with his aunt is laughable. And then, after having the rings for a few minutes, he defeats the beast that is so powerful that these people have lived here for thousands of years just to guard it. It's ridiculous. Speaking of ridiculous, this movie is a masterclass on how to set up arguably the most interesting and intimidating villain in the entire MCU, and then how to ruin him completely all in the span of 2 hours. Wenwu is terrifying, largely because of Tony Leung's masterful performance. The idea of a ruthless warlord who has lived for hundreds of years in search of power, choosing to give up everything to fall in love and have children, only to have his wife murdered, causing him to return to his life of cruelty, is still probably the best setup for any MCU villain. Even by watching him sit at a table and talk, you can feel a millennium of conquest in every word, every calculated motion. His search for power is not angry or lustful, but cold and deliberate, efficient, just as likely to kill you as he is to offer you a drink and hear your perspective, depending on whichever benefits him most. But all of this is thrown out of the window for yet another misunderstanding plot. Having the entire conflict of the movie be based not on a battle of convictions, but on the fact that he's been made the pawn of some other, much less interesting antagonist, which draws its strength not from its characterization, but because it's a big, bad, scary demon guy, is the worst possible move. To this day, I really can't wrap my head around it. We set up this amazing character Wenwu, and then immediately make him a foolish pawn to some stupid monster. Wenwu goes out like a loser, having his soul sucked out by a demon because he was too stupid to see through its deception. And the movie spends so much time on CGI nonsense that his final moments of recognizing his folly and accepting that the best way to honor his wife's memory was by being a good father to their children gets no time at all. I will never get over how they treated Wenwu. This was the moment when I realized we're in the MCU Dark Ages. Katy is very funny, but she also suffers from a third act that's more interested in dragons than it is stories. What's the deal with dragons anyway? Knowing everything the movie has taught us about this character, having her learn to shoot an arrow and then be good at it the very next day would have been an insult to our intelligence, even if by good at it they just meant was really helpful in the fight against the demons. But having her actually shoot the impossible shot to hit the big bad, saving Shang-Chi and the world, is beyond offensive. I like that they made a character whose arc is about finding her purpose in life, but they messed up because they forgot to establish that she's good at basically anything at all. For example, they could have at least established that she was, I don't know, a fast learner of all subjects in school, but didn't have enough motivation to commit to anything. That way, learning to shoot the arrows in a day could be seen as totally in her wheelhouse, and her arc becomes about fighting nihilism and learning to care about something. I basically just made that up off the top of my head, but you get the idea. Instead, we're left with this, where like Shang-Chi, she suddenly develops superhuman aptitude so she can help fight a big demon, and her only growth revolves around the fact that she did badass things that she can brag to her friends about. I will say they did establish that she's a good driver, which came in handy during like 3 different sequences, so for that at least I can say well done. Okay, Xialing is pretty awesome. Her backstory is heartbreaking. The scene in the arena where we watch the flashback of him promising to come back, followed by her swift kicking him, knocking him out cold, is some of the best character work the MCU has to offer. And then in the very next scene, her first line is telling Katy that she loves her pants. This lets us know that she's a badass, but she's also pretty chill and down to earth, which makes her vendetta against Shang-Chi much more interesting than if she were just some evil asshole.
It was 6 years. That's how long it took me to realize I didn't need him anymore.
Is a great line that is powerfully delivered. And her journey to accepting him as a brother and defining her own self-worth independent of her father actually feels pretty well realized. If I did have one note, it would be that I wish the movie leaned into her gray morality a bit more. Her ultimate goal is to build an empire that rivals the strength of her father. That's unequivocally not a noble goal. Even if girls are allowed in, she's still trying to build an empire. And if there's one thing that history teaches us, it's that you don't build an empire with kindness. You build it by stepping on others and clawing your way through the top through pure power. And that's okay. It's cooler if she walks away an anti-hero. She goes out of her way to kill a guy in her first action scene. She shouldn't be stopping just short of people's necks in the finale. She should be stomping motherfuckers out. It differentiates her from the rest of the heroes and sets the stage for potential future conflict. And if there's anything you've gleaned from this video thus far, I hope it's that I love a situation where people are forced to choose between their loved ones and their ideals. Trevor is hilarious, but he's much more comic relief than he is a character with an arc. But that's not the end of the world. We do get an explanation for why he was the Mandarin and a bit of redemption for him, which for a throwaway character is well above the curve for Marvel. Trevor, I approve. Believe it or not, Eternals, the second of the Hindenburg projects, was my most anticipated movie of 2021. With an all-star cast, a Best Picture-winning director, and a really interesting new aesthetic for the MCU, I was convinced that Marvel wouldn't go so hard to release a movie based on D-list comic characters if they didn't have something truly special brewing. As we all know now, I was wrong. Usually when I hear critics say the movie didn't have enough time to do what it wanted, it feels like a cop-out. But here, it really is the problem. There are so many characters, and you can see where they're trying to go with a lot of them, but it just doesn't land because we don't get enough time to care. Let's start with Ikarus, because a few other characters require I talk about him first. On paper, his arc is fine. He's one of the only ones who doesn't suffer from the time problem. It's clear from start to finish in the directing, writing, and acting that Ikarus is a complete and total psychopath. His mission to serve Arishem is all he cares about, except for one thing, his love for Sersi, who he ends up choosing over Arishem, which is why he kills himself at the end of the film. I've already talked about how much I love when Marvel makes characters balance their beliefs versus their love for another character. The problem is that he is played as such an unstable creep that I never believe that he actually loves Sersi. He follows her around, staring at her like a piece of meat, treating her almost like Homelander did with Maeve in the beginning of The Boys, without the outward violence, which again would be fine if the movie didn't try to treat their relationship as real love. He never shows any interest in her as a person, never relates to her at all, except in one moment where he admits that he's going to learn more about humans just to get closer to her, but even then, the delivery and context make that seem more robotic and creepy than genuine. The main thing he says over and over again is that
You are very beautiful, Sersi.
which is not a compelling reason to fall in love with someone, especially on screen. Richard Madden plays a pretty good diet Homelander. Ikarus is cold and scary to watch, but if that's all you're going to make him, then you can't have the entire plot revolve around 3 characters being totally in love with him. Why do other characters see him as a leader? What makes them attracted to him? Why are we the only ones who can tell this guy is a sociopath? And if his love for Sersi is not supposed to be predatory but genuine, then you've got to show us that. We never get to see him like they do, and so in the end, when he gives up his life mission for love, we're left not really caring. Sersi is a little nerd who loves humans. She works at a museum, has a human boyfriend, uses an iPhone, and is chosen by Ajak because she knows that Sersi will fight to protect humans more than anyone else. 2 problems though. 1, she doesn't really have much personality. She speaks to the Darwin statue in the beginning, which is very charming, but that honestly might have been her best moment in the movie. You tell us she's a nerd and that she loves humans, but they don't spend enough time making that specific, and so her character is often just kind of there. This, I recognize, is a time problem. The bigger, more serious problem that is not related to time is is Ikarus. As I've just laid out, the man is a sociopath. Why does this smart, gentle, caring person fall in love with him? It makes Sersi look so pathetic. And don't say nice girls like bad boys or try to justify it with some of your headcanon. If the movie had actually made the point that Sersi's one weakness is a bad boy, that would have been a great way to give her a bit more personality. But they don't. You can make up all the reasons you want, but the fact remains that this movie never explains once why this woman would ever love this creep. If you haven't rewatched their romance scenes, I recommend you do, because they are so weird. Sprite's character arc is really great, you guessed it, on paper. I love the idea of exploring what thousands of years of living physically as a child does to someone. It's like a fairy tale curse, and it's a genuinely moving premise. The problem, though, is threefold. First, as you probably expect me to say, it is so lame that she likes Ikarus. He sucks, and like with Sersi, you can invent a million reasons why she might, but the movie never cares to. Secondly, as you also probably expect me to say, the movie doesn't get enough time with her great premise to actually do anything interesting with it. There's a great moment in the bar early in the movie where you can see her using her powers to talk to a young man, only for him to realize it's an illusion. And this is good character work. She knows that it could never lead anywhere because the second it did, he would see through it, but she does it anyway because pretending for a few minutes hurts less. If the movie did more of this, Sprite would be awesome. But instead, we get a few other points where characters tell us that Sprite loves Ikarus, and suddenly she's choosing his side to destroy the world. Again, if you want us to believe that Sprite is in so much pain that she's ready to kill everyone for a fresh start, then you have to show us that. I mean, she must have been in a really dark place. This movie could have gotten some great moments if they had given us more of a glimpse of what that despair looks like. Lastly, Sersi having some celestial power left over and using it to make Sprite human is unbelievably silly. I guess you could round out her arc by making her human, but do you have to Deus Ex Machina that? We couldn't have set it up earlier? And if you want us to care, we have to buy into this moment of catharsis, which we don't really, because again, we never get to see the depths of her pain and what she's going through. Thena is a warrior through and through. She lives to fight, and it's all she cares about, which is pretty interesting as an initial setup. This leads to some great moments, like where she tells Sersi to get up off the floor, and her best line in the film,
"You've never had to fight me."
But I've always wanted to.
But the Mad Weary plotline about her randomly losing her mind because she's got some software error that causes her to get caught up in her past life is so stupid. It takes up so much time in this film, and she overcomes it not by learning anything or changing in any way, but basically by deciding not to have the problem anymore. It almost feels like they were trying to say something about mental health with Thena, which could have been cool, but if they were, I don't know what kind of message they're trying to send with that one. The much more interesting thread that this movie never has time for is her quest for revenge against the deviant that killed Gilgamesh. By the end of the movie, it's so unbelievably clear that the Eternal and Deviant should be working together that Thena just cutting him into pieces is ridiculous. Her arc should have been about realizing that she and the Deviant are the same, and that this cycle of revenge is distracting them from their true shared enemy, the Celestials. The fact that this revelation of peace would come to the most bloodthirsty Eternal while she's out for revenge would have been a great way to round out her story. Also, I'm pissed that we don't get more action sequences with her that don't involve her being weird and brainwashed. Hello, I grew up watching Angelina Jolie kick ass and look cool while doing it. The least the MCU could do is give us more of that. I like Ajak. She's a lover, not a fighter, and the movie does a great job of showing this in the few scenes that she's in. Her best moment is when she finds out Ikarus is about to murder her, and all she does is hug him and apologize for allowing him to be led down this path. That's powerful stuff, and it's represented by her power set, which is basically just healing. But she's not a physical healer, but a spiritual one. She's like the group therapist, and it sucks that we only get to see small glimpses of this. If Sprite's arc got more time to breathe, for example, it would have been great to see how Ajak helped her through dark times, but instead it's only vaguely referenced at. It's clear to the characters in this movie how significant Ajak's death is, but because they don't have time to show how much she does for them, it only really matters to us because the movie tells us it does. Druig is probably the most interesting Eternal. He's initially the only one questioning their blind loyalty to Arisham and Ajak's decision to allow humans to slaughter each other. And it's such a creepy, fun choice that his prescription for fixing this is mass brainwashing. He's got the makings of a really cool anti-hero, or even villain. His fondness for uncomfortable truth is one of the few character through lines in this movie, as he's also the only one willing to speak out loud the facts that revenge won't bring peace for Thena, and that the Deviants are no different from them. Which, by the way, is all the more offensive because he is clearly right, and yet these things still never get explored, but I digress. I also liked how he was willing to use humans as living weapons when fighting the Deviants, but I think they totally missed an opportunity here. I get that he's been in solitude for hundreds of years, but he clearly has access to YouTube at least. Instead of having them create an antiquated firing line, he should have a coordinated force of bodies, all attacking under one mind. Imagine if Druig fighting with his villagers looked more like the Avengers, coordinating in their fight against Thanos on Titan. Unfortunately, the movie doesn't really have time to do anything with this really interesting character they've built. He has a great rivalry with Ikarus that never gets resolved, and an intriguing romance with Makkari that never gets explored. Nor do we find out why they never looked for each other for 500 years. He has an interesting outlook about how he would have brainwashed the world, but accepted that flaws are what makes humans human, but this is only mentioned briefly, so without any specifics, it comes across as cliche, and also inexplicably conflicts with most of his actions in the film. If they had more time, it would have been great to watch him reckon with his belief that they shouldn't be pawns to some all-powerful god, while recognizing that that's exactly what he does to others. But alas, the movie doesn't have time. Kingo is pretty funny, and like many of the others, I like that his powers are specific with a built-in downside. He can make a super big blast, but he has to charge up, which leaves him more vulnerable. That's more rules to a power system than the entirety of Multiverse of Madness. Unfortunately, that's about all that I can say good about him. As a third character who's obsessed with Ikarus, we are once again left wondering why. Is it because the fact that he's the most powerful makes him like a big brother? If so, you have to actually show us that. I mean, people always talk about how Kumail Nanjiani bulked up only to be comedic relief, but it is so much worse. They had him bulk up just to be the sycophant sidekick to a weirdo with no personality. He literally calls him boss. And they introduce this fact like right before the finale of the movie. But this isn't even the worst part of Kingo's character. No. Let's talk about how they make him the only Eternal with a human sidekick who comes along for the journey, and still make him the one who doesn't care that all the humans died. I mean, Kingo literally has a human following him around doing everything for him. A personal servant. And at the end of the movie, Kingo basically says, "Your life and all you've done for me mean nothing to me." And it's basically just presented without comment. And Karun is a character that has so much heart in this movie. It's not like he's someone you can easily cast aside. I mean, wouldn't it have been cool if Kingo realized throughout the movie that he treats Karun how Ikarus treated him, and he learns to respect humans? Or in Kingo's quest to become like Ikarus, he goes too far, and they commit to him going dark and deciding that he doesn't care about Karun or humans. Either would be a great place to take the Ikarus ass-licking plotline. Instead, we get this wishy-washiness where the movie commits to neither, and we're left with a character who's just kind of a dick. And that's it. He's funny, and he's kind of a dick. Not like a total dick to the point where that's his thing, but just like kind of a dick. And somehow, Karun gets disrespected by Disney more than he does Kingo. For the first half of the movie, Karun is a really cool character. Not only is he funny, but he's the stand-in for humanity in the movie. And he represents us so well. He's set up as a moral compass for Kingo, someone who reminds him of what matters. It's a strong statement because he is what they're fighting for. When Kingo realizes that the world is going to end, he tells Karun to go home. And Karun insists that he's going to stay because it's the most important thing that he could be doing right now.
And do what? Watch TV?
He stands up to Druig, saying that we must try to do better, when Druig implies that humanity doesn't deserve to live. And when Gilgamesh dies, he holds the funeral, as the resident human who has had to deal with death before. I mean, this guy literally convinced Kingo to help out in the first place. If I could gush over the captain's orders scene again, there's nothing I love more in superhero stories than when the hero inspires everyday people to stand up for what's right, even if they can't do much to help. Karun stays because maybe at some point the difference between life and death for everyone on Earth could come down to one extra human who was able to pull a lever at the right time or give a pep talk when it mattered. It harkens back to little old Steve Rogers, standing up to bullies and jumping on grenades. And then they do the unthinkable. They spit in the faces of every single human on this planet. This man, this funny-looking yet surprisingly wise and passionate old man who has spent the entire movie reminding us why humanity deserves to be fought for, decides that actually humanity isn't all that important and that it's time to go home. Why? Because Kingo did. And let's be clear, Kingo didn't even demand he leave. In fact, it doesn't look like Kingo really cares either way. And he still just leaves because Kingo does. I mean, what a message for this movie. Yeah, when the chips are down, we humans don't actually stand up for ourselves, and we're totally willing to accept the fiery demise of every single being on this planet because we follow the boss, and boss said he's leaving. They couldn't find anything for Karun to do in the finale. I mean, he's been recording things the whole movie, and they set up that Sersi's good at using an iPhone. Why not have him finish his documentary by broadcasting the Eternals' message message live to the entire world, giving the group the strength to carry on. I mean, what a total loser. He gets turned from a man who happens to be funny but has an adorable sense of dignity into a complete laughingstock. Phastos is pretty underwhelming. I like that he had a secret weapon to fight Ikarus, saying that he'd seen this coming and had been preparing for it in case it happened. That's fun character work. Everything else, His justification for why he stops helping humans is weird. Some humans nuked some other humans, therefore humans aren't worth helping? Hello, the innocent children who got nuked were just as much humans as the ones who did it. How many people is he letting die because he won't give humans life-saving medical technology because checks notes some of them might use it to do bad things? Also, why is he allowed to give them technology anyway? They're not allowed to stop genocide, but they are allowed to invent the plow? Or how about when Phastos explains that he has a husband and a son and that those are the only two things that matter to him in the world, which he then uses to justify why he won't stop the world from imploding in a fiery apocalypse? What, does he think Arishem will spare them? In general, I like that he has a family and that's why he ends up fighting so hard for Earth, and they have some good scenes together, but Phastos overall is very meh. Speaking of meh, they took the coolest character and did absolutely nothing with her. The way that Lauren Ridloff is able to portray so much without speaking a word is incredible, and the beauty of sign language feels very appropriate for these ancient, mysterious beings. It's extremely well realized, and it adds a lot to Makkari's disposition and personality. I loved every time she showed up on screen, and that's not just because I totally have a crush on her. Her visuals are easily the coolest, and the fact that her powers are the reason for her deafness is a great piece of world building. Or, I guess, it would be if the movie actually said or implied that. The problem, again, is that the movie has no time to do anything with her. She's mischievous, a bit of a kleptomaniac, has a good heart, and is randomly in love with Druig. That's basically all we ever get. Makkari doesn't grow or change much. She's not really doing anything interesting or valuable with her time except hoarding artifacts for no other reason than she likes them. In 500 years of boredom, she doesn't even take 15 seconds to run across the world and visit the guy she's supposedly in love with for seemingly no reason at all. I mean, I can't even talk bad about her character arc because there's really nothing to talk about. She's just here so they can have a deaf character and hopefully win internet points. And as awesome as her performance and that premise is, that's just not enough. Gilgamesh is a gentle giant who has the strongest punch in the world and also makes food with a cute apron. How could you not love him? But again, the movie has no time to explore him. So he loves Thena so much that he's willing to live out his years with her in the middle of nowhere. Okay, but, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, why? Can we give any character in this movie that's obsessed with another character even one reason in this entire film? I mean, what even is the nature of their relationship? It doesn't feel very romantic, but the fact that it is so noticeably unexplained means there's really no other assumption other than the fact that he's in love with her, which makes him such a loser. He's basically just Smithers. But even Smithers, as well as others like Harley Quinn and Haku, are able to explore the concept of undying devotion in an interesting way. Here, he's just a lovesick puppy, and the movie has no time to give us any more explanation than that. And then he dies. And his funeral is a perfect example of what's wrong with this movie. Because we never get the chance to explore the specifics of his love, why he made the choice he made, or what he stood for, the scene that brings the Eternals together is exactly the scene where I paused and checked Twitter. Gilgamesh's death means nothing to me. I would have thought they would at least have something specific that he represents that changes them going forward, but no. In fact, the dialogue immediately following the scene where he dies has nothing to do with him. I mean, literally, the plot moves forward without even attempting to make any meaning of it whatsoever. I like Dane. He doesn't get much to do in this movie, but he does well enough with the time that he has. The movie, again, doesn't really establish why he loves Sersi so much, but here it's less offensive because he gets so little screen time anyway, and she is a beautiful, all-powerful goddess, so whatever. Dane works for me because he embodies what Karun didn't. The scenes that he's in, he's always looking for a way to help, even though he's way out of his league. It's charming to see his insecurity when placed next to the all-powerful Ikarus, and it's a nice touch that he finally goes to get Excalibur because he's sick of not being able to help Sersi. I think if this were any other movie, I would be upset at how little this all was explored, but it's explored about as much as everyone else, and he gets like a third of the screen time. Bucky, the third of the Hindenburg projects, is a feel-good, Christmas show. Hear me when I say this. The action scenes mirror Home Alone, there's a classic get home by Christmas trope, and the themes are about embracing family and inspiring people. The music, the costumes, the dialogue, the sets, everything about this show gives feel-good Christmas vibes. Except one thing, the uncomfortable truth that Clint spent the last 5 years extrajudicially murdering random criminals around the world. For most of the show, it seems like an interesting contradiction that needs to be resolved. But then there's a key moment. Clint is standing over Maya, the young girl whose father he murdered, and he doesn't apologize, he doesn't question his actions, there's no regret or even respect. Instead, he threatens her, which, yes, could be a cool place to take Clint, the Christmas dad who murders people, but remember what I said, this is not a show about Clint being a cold-hearted killer. In fact, being a killer is basically never brought up again. Maya comes to terms with her father's death and gives up on revenge off-screen, and Clint's back to inspiring people and spending Christmas with his family. If feel-good Christmas story is what they're going for, he has to apologize to Maya during this moment of truth. The story they're telling just doesn't work without it. And the constant flashbacks to Natasha, which don't really go anywhere, would be the perfect way for him to discover this. Natasha spent the final years of her life trying to help people so that she might earn redemption for her past deeds, and then died basically in his arms fulfilling that wish. The show could have used the conflict with Yelena to help him realize that he won't come to terms with Natasha's death unless he spends the years as she did, atoning. He doesn't get to just live out his years as the Christmas dad. He has too much red in his ledger. I can't emphasize enough how out of place this plotline is. Clint has some really sweet moments in this show. Participating in a LARP because he's too kind-hearted to ruin these people's day is really charming, as is watching him switch into dad mode because Kate's whole life is turned upside down. He calls her his partner, gets her some trick arrows, and even wears her silly outfit because she's at her lowest point and that's what he does. He did the same thing to Wanda in Age of Ultron, which really cements the message of this show, that being a hero is about inspiring people. But when we give him this sweet family ending and basically ignore the entire subplot about him being a murderer, how exactly am I supposed to feel? Because I didn't feel good. Finally, I get to talk about a character I like again. Look, I get it. She's kind of corny, but I've always said I'm okay with any choice as long as it's done well. I think a lot of the bits here are really well written and funny. Unlike the banter in the next film we're going to talk about, most of these silly moments are filled with fun character work, like giving dating advice to wannabe mobsters or dancing around in circles with Yelena about the fact that they clearly want to be best friends. An all-time great MCU moment is when Kate and Clint are on the train after a big fight and they talk about how much they need to feed the dog. Seriously, if you don't remember that scene from episode 3, you should watch it. It's like 45 seconds long, but does more to endear me to their relationship than some other projects do with hours of screen time. Anyways, Clint spends the entire show warning Kate that this life comes at a price, and choosing to do it means she has to be willing to pay. And by the end, she is, as she is forced to blow her entire life up and watch her mom walk away in handcuffs. This is all done pretty well and ties in with the central question that Clint and Kate are wrestling with, what it means to be a hero. Unfortunately, this rumination falls short because Yelena, who poses the question to her, is mad about something that Clint didn't even do, rather than the many atrocities he actually committed. Which means, again, because the show isn't willing to take seriously the gravity of Clint's actions, Kate doesn't get to actually wrestle with the interesting questions that Yelena poses to her. Maya is where this show falls completely off the rails. I was enamored by Alaqua Cox's Maya in this show. Her affect is so eerie and uncanny, but she also feels really genuine at the same time. Her backstory is heartbreaking, and of course, she's a total badass, which is why I was particularly heartbroken when watching her arc fall apart, and fall apart it did. By the end, her actions make zero sense. Let's talk about it. So, Clint gives a complete non-apology, as we've discussed, and Maya seems unimpressed, even going so far as to try to kill him afterwards. And once their fight is over, she confronts Kazi, strongly suggesting she suspects he had a part in her father's murder. So, to be clear, right before the finale, we establish two things. 1, she doesn't accept Clint's non-apology and tries to kill him, and 2, she suspects Kazi was involved in her father's murder. The second one literally never comes up again. I mean, literally. The next time we see her, she is looking at a picture of Kazi and then begging him to run away with her. This makes 0 sense. Even if we accept that Clint's ridiculous speech got through to her and made her give up on vengeance and gang life, and even if we accept that happened off screen after they told us the opposite was true, how on God's green earth does that mean that she suddenly wants to run away with the man she suspected was involved in her father's murder, without even pressing if it's true or not? Oh, but it gets worse. In trying to get Kazi to run away with her, she stops him from killing Clint, the man who, as we established, she just tried to kill the last time we saw her. Do you see now why it is crucial to the plot and message of this show that Clint apologizes in that moment? If Clint gives a genuine, heartfelt apology and tells Maya he will spend the rest of his life atoning, and she, inspired by his words, decides to give up on vengeance, then her change of heart makes total sense. But wait, it gets worse. Maya, in defending herself against Kazi, just straight up kills him, and then does a reverse 180 back into being a vengeful killer. Her arc in episode 6 does a 360 no-scope. She's vengeful, then she's trying to protect the people she was just trying to get revenge on, and then she goes back to being vengeful again. Why exactly? Well, the show doesn't really say. This ending is so silly and so sloppy compared to the excellent writing in the first 5 episodes that I can't help but feel they were rushed to complete it by the studio. It just doesn't make sense otherwise. For Kingpin, perhaps more than any other Phase 4 character, no one can say that the reason he's bad is because our expectations were too high. Why? Because for 5 episodes, this show worked overtime to play directly into those fan expectations. I never watched Netflix's Daredevil, so the only thing I knew about Kingpin coming in was that everyone loved him on Daredevil. But for those who weren't around when this show was coming out, almost every episode had a small nod to foreshadow Kingpin's arrival. Fans were frothing at the mouth, and I started to too, but not without reason. There are multiple times in this show where Clint, Avenger, friend of Thor, emotionless killer of basically every other mob boss on the face of the planet, basically starts shaking in his boots at the mention of Kingpin. He won't even say his name. He just calls him the big guy. They're giving this motherfucker the Voldemort treatment. And that's where they messed up hard. Because now it's not just the fans who have high expectations out of Kingpin, it's the characters in universe. Anyone who can make Clint Barton shiver in his boots is a really big deal. So why, oh why, do they spend the entirety of episode 6 trying to make as much of a joke out of Kingpin as they possibly can? Keep in mind, this is supposed to be a major villain for Daredevil and Spider-Man. Their first mistake, how could they possibly think it's a good idea to make the tracksuits Kingpin's army? The tracksuits are absolutely hilarious, and they are also the most incompetent group of buffoons in maybe the entire MCU, and that's saying something. I took it for granted that the tracksuit operation was like one of his small fry operations, which is why he's okay putting his niece in charge of it. Like when a king allows members of his family to rule over certain lands, so long as they all swear fealty. The extent of his interactions with the tracksuits should be meeting with Maya once a month for a status report and a briefcase full of money. But then they show him in his personal quarters, and who are his bodyguards? The same guys the show has been going out of their way at every corner to tell us are idiots? This is his main force? And then they have him 1v1 Kate Bishop and he loses. Kingpin, OG Spider-Man villain, arch nemesis to Daredevil, and Clint Barton's scarer, loses to Kate Bishop. Why was Clint so afraid of him again? And I'm sorry, their fight scene in general was just so silly. Clearly he has some sort of superpowers, but having him bounce around like a rubber ball and cartoonishly pummel Kate is just not a flattering image for a big scary mafia guy. If he's a mob boss, he should only have to fight when his back is completely against the wall and he's been broken down, which I think this show agrees with. The problem is, the best time to break him down is categorically not in his first appearance against a single plucky hero. At least not if he's expected to have longevity in the MCU. The writers of the Daredevil show have their work cut out for them, because I don't know if it will be possible to see him as scary again. Good thing mistakes like these are not going to happen anymore in Phase 5, right? I think that Kazi, Maya, Eleanor, and Yelena together are more than enough to give our heroes an interesting finale. Let Kingpin show up once the dust clears so he can threaten them while keeping that air of ominous and mystique. I know using a villain for a tease is generally looked down upon these days, but it's much better than introducing him and then breaking him down to a whimpering loser all in the span of an episode. I'm sure there's a middle ground where he plays a big enough part in the finale but isn't reduced to sniveling by the end. I think Eleanor is pretty good in this story. She's clearly very flawed as a mom, and she kind of wears that on her sleeve, which is really endearing and makes her relatable. Some of her scenes with Jack are adorable and extremely well acted, and her ability to throw Jack, who she clearly loves, under the bus and kill his uncle, all while convincing herself that she has to keep her family safe, is really complex villain work for the MCU. Same with her final haunting line to Kate.
Is this what heroes do? Arrest their mothers on Christmas?
You can really see where she's coming from and how she deludes herself into blaming others for her choices. Eleanor, you're all right with me. I think Jack is very funny. He's a total himbo, and the dialogue is written so well that you can't help but laugh. My one issue is that the show basically forgets about him in the finale. Does he know that Eleanor betrayed him? If not, why is he not looking for her to make sure she's safe? If so, why isn't he reacting to it? Where is Jack's final moment of reckoning as Eleanor is escorted into the back of a police car? They could have given him literally anything and it probably would have worked. They just didn't. They can choose to make Laura a retired double agent, but I have to say she was much more interesting when she wasn't. I know how that sounds, but hear me out. This whole show, Laura is Clint's woman in the chair. We learn here that she's not just some damsel in distress stuck raising the kids. She knows the lingo, she knows the plans, and she uses this to advise and support Clint while he's in the field. And I just think that storyline is way cooler when she's learned these things out of necessity, because that's what it means to be married to Hawkeye. It says a lot about partnership and makes Clint's marriage specific and unique. That's not to say I wouldn't love to see her get her hands dirty when she has to, but there's a reason Joyce Byers is the unequivocal best Stranger Things character. She has no powers and no experience as a police officer, she's just a mom. But she rises to the occasion and becomes someone different because she has to protect her family. Until the twist, I was excited to see Marvel take Laura to that place, but oh well. Grills and his friends are awesome. This is how you write side characters in the MCU. They're funny, they're touching, they remind Clint of the difference he can make, they get to use their skills as regular people to help the heroes in creative ways, and they get a perfect silly ending. No, I will not be addressing how they seemingly abandon people in danger to change into silly costumes, nor will I be addressing that some of them are cops. I have to maintain my suspension of disbelief too, you know. No Way Home, as much as I hate to admit it, gives Peter a pretty good character arc. But if you don't mind, I plan to complain a lot before we get there. The problem is, the plot and writing have to jump through so many hoops to get this movie where they clearly wanted it to go that it's embarrassing. The first act of the movie, right up until when Doc Ock shows up, is tough to get through for many reasons, but especially for Peter's character. Peter is faced with a problem, which is that he's being framed for murder. You already know how much I despise a misunderstanding plot, but beyond that, there are many things a kid in his position could do to combat this. Especially a kid like Peter, whose most redeeming quality has always been his genuineness, not to mention his ingenuity. This kid wears his heart on his sleeve, and many times has proven himself to others, including in this very movie, by just laying it all out there and being completely honest. He could wage a counteroffensive on social media, or he could use his sciencey investigation skills and Stark tech to go back to the crime scene and prove his innocence. Or, as Doctor Strange points out, don't worry, we'll get to his ass, he could literally just call MIT and ask for a meeting. And before any of you give me some stupid in-universe reason why this definitely couldn't work, the point is that Peter should try. This whole problem, because it's just a misunderstanding, feels contrived and uninteresting, but compounding that with the fact that he does nothing at all to try to fix it makes watching this act of the movie like nails on a chalkboard for me. I hate it. But of course, the movie doesn't have time to explore how a well-written, thoughtful Peter might approach this unique problem, because the problem is just a random excuse to make the plot happen. After doing nothing, he finally goes to Doctor Strange to do the work for him. And then, in his first fight, he wins because of Stark Tech. Now, I'm not one of those guys that has an issue with Peter relying on Stark Tech in the MCU, but you have to let Peter win his fights with Stark. Here, he gets lucky because of Stark. Why can't we have him, say, realize that Otto is interested in Stark Tech and trick him into putting it on, using his own hubris against him? That gives Peter agency in his own movie, while showing off his quick thinking and technical abilities. Anyways, Peter and Bozo the Clown decide that his personal problem is somehow worth magically and non-consensually wiping the brains of every single human being on the planet. It's beyond stupid, but I'll talk more about it with Strange. Let's get to Peter's actual arc in this film. And can I just say, thank God for Aunt May. Her convincing Peter to help these people instead of letting them die is really great, and might be Peter's first moment of agency in the entire movie. It's really touching to watch the movie reconceptualize these villains as people that desperately need help. Watching Peter Peter save Otto is such a strong moment. And watching Norman kill May and then explicitly challenge him to abandon the conviction she taught him in her dying breath is the stuff that movies are made of. And then choosing to bring in Toby and Andrew to help remind him of these convictions, because with great power comes great responsibility, is the lesson they also had to learn, is really moving. All the way through to the end, where Toby convinces Peter not to kill Norman, Peter's arc is basically the one thing about this movie that works. Or it would. See, it's kind of more like the outlines of an arc. I like the journey itself, but a lot of the specifics are half-assed. He brought 4 villains into his home with his aunt and let the giant monsters stay in the truck after he told MJ and Ned they couldn't come because it's too dangerous. The Peters are skilled enough to synthesize extremely different cures for 4 different villains using the materials available in a high school science lab. And let's not even talk about him beating Doctor Strange with geometry. One critic said this movie was like a theme park ride or an SNL sketch, and I have to say that's exactly right. It kind of just throws a lot of random characters and action at you without taking the time to explore the truth of these situations. So it's hard to take Peter's arc seriously, even when the important moments shine, because the minute-to-minute experience is full of fluff. The last part of Peter's arc that I want to talk about is his journey with MJ. So let's do that in her section. The movie does so much great work to flesh out MJ's character. She's such a great presence in this movie. She has so much agency, she's a big part of the action, and she always wants to help. For so much of the film, they really go out of their way to show that she and Peter are equals in many ways. She talks back to Strange, takes on random odd jobs during Peter's shenanigans. She and Ned work with Peter via a camera when he's hunting Electro, and she refuses to let Peter send the other Peters back to their universes until he hears them out. All great stuff. And it's all underscored by her making Peter promise to make decisions with her. That is, right up until the very end, when Peter undermines all of this by choosing to reject the biggest decision they ever made together, which is that he will find her after she loses her memory of him. And it's not like I don't get why he did it, but then what was the point of her arc in this film? Peter just threw everything they talked about away and made a decision on his own again. Maybe if we were able to spend more time watching Peter come to terms with how close he was to losing his MJ like Andrew Peter did, his change of heart at the end would feel better. It would feel not like a backslide, but like a next step for their relationship, where he considers the reality she's proposing and rejects it, which I guess is what they're going for, but the way it's presented, it just feels like we're back where they started at the beginning of the film. I mean, besides her memory, but that'll be fixed in the next one. Ned was so fun in Homecoming, but in this movie, I'm already totally disinterested because of how Far From Home assassinated his character. Once, he was a genuine man in the chair. Now, he's just in the way, and there's not much more to say about it. The fact that they think this whole I'm magic now thing makes up for him not being an interesting, likable character anymore is straight up insulting, both to Ned as a character and to the MCU and what was set up in Doctor Strange. It's unbelievably stupid, and is somehow one of the worst parts of this film. I've already said most of what I want to say about May, but I want to gush a bit about one small scene. The scene where she meets a shaking, clearly unwell Norman Osborn is such a wonderful scene, because it uses May's job and her background to its advantage, fleshing out who she is and what she does to drive the plot. She meets Norman because she works at a shelter that helps people, which means her introduction to the villains of this movie happens in the context of her role as a community servant. This is a genius move, because it means that her decisions, and therefore her death, isn't arbitrary. Of course it makes sense that she would work to convince Peter to help Norman instead of letting him die. That's literally her life mission. All of that gets recontextualized in just this little scene. She didn't just up and decide to be a cliche who believes that helping people is better than harming them in some vague or frivolous way. This is who she is, and the movie shows us that with this scene. To me, it somehow fills all of May's decisions and therefore Peter's with some gravitas. I don't know, maybe I'm looking too much into this because of how much it resonates with my views on life and politics, but I just think May is such a heartwarming character in this movie. R.I.P. May, abolitionist queen. So, for the villains, I want to start with a question. Anyone can throw a bunch of popular characters into a movie. So why had Avengers-type films not been tried before? Why were they feats of filmmaking in the first place? Do you remember when Avengers 1 came out? How skeptical everyone was that it could be pulled off? That doubt is indicative of the pitfall of these films. They're not just about putting a bunch of cool characters together. By making a huge ensemble cast, you are promising fans not only that their favorite characters will be there, but that they will all be done justice. You have to be familiar with these these characters and their journeys and be interested in coming up with cool ways to build on those journeys. Because anyone can throw a bunch of characters into a movie. I cringe at the comparison of this movie to Infinity War and Endgame, not because they don't do it well, but because they don't even try. It really does feel like an SNL sketch. The team-ups aren't about characters, they're about cameos, and the villains are a great example of this. Lizard has nothing to do and barely contributes to the plot. That's it. That's his whole section. Okay, fine. Let's use him to talk about a larger issue here. Dr. Connors regretted his actions by the end of The Amazing Spider-Man. So, which version of Lizard is this exactly? Why does Sandman remember his change of heart, but Lizard and Otto don't? Also, isn't he totally not going to die when he goes back to his world, just be cured? And wouldn't his Peter know that? These aren't small gripes. Their disinterest in establishing even the basic logic of who this character is makes it difficult to understand and relate to him. And the same can be said for Sandman, Electro, and Otto. Sandman is almost worse, only because by immediately siding with Peter, he dangles in front of us the allure of a much better script where the villains have actual thoughts and motivations. But then, because of a split moment misunderstanding, he decides to 180 entirely and attack Peter. And Peter, supposedly the hero, responds not by trying to talk to him, but by locking him away. Nothing like some good old plot contrivance to ensure that the villains and the heroes are on opposing sides. Is Sandman good? Is he evil? The movie doesn't really know, but it can justify whichever one it needs in the moment by having him murmur something about his daughter. Electro is more of the same. He, an unapologetic villain who hasn't once flinched from his desire for more power, is almost convinced to abandon all of his power in just a few minutes. And then one speech from Norman and he immediately turns right back around. I like the idea of a villain being convinced to abandon his powers because of regret, but the movie has established very clearly that that's not this guy. If you want him to consider having a change of heart, you've got to show us why this character would do that. Remember sweet, nerdy Max just looking for a friend? Show us that side of him. Remind us who he is. And then I'm totally on board. Here, it's just silly that it took a speech from Norman to remind him of the one thing that they've established about him so far, and that's that he wants more power. Showing him react to arc reactor technology and having him tell Peter he thought he was black were pretty good though. Unlike the other three, Otto and Norman are characters at the very least and not plot devices, which for some reason goes a long way in this film. Otto's moment of salvation from his induced insanity was very moving and is a major moment for the emotional through line of this movie. But it's a bit lazy when that already happened at the end of the last film. So instead of writing a new arc for Otto, they basically moved him backwards in time and had the same arc that he did in the last movie. If we didn't waste so much time with the three plot devices, we might have had time to expound on them. But alas. Dafoe's performance as Osborn is fantastic and moving. Goblin genuinely challenges Peter's convictions and forces him to question who he is. I have gripes with how rushed some of the beats are, but you've heard it all already. Overall, Norman is pretty good. I feel largely the same about the Spider-Men as I do the villains. There are some great moments, like Andrew Peter saying he always wanted brothers, and Toby Peter telling Andrew Peter that he's amazing. But overall, I'm left feeling meh. Why bring these legendary characters into the movie if you aren't going to do something with them? There's a ton of exposition, a few cute jokes, and then they're just fighting over the plot of the day. Remember in Into the Spider-Verse when Jake Peter went back to his universe a changed man because the time spent with other Spider-Men reminded him who he was? None of that here. In a beautifully acted monologue, Andrew Peter says that he stopped pulling his punches because he got rageful. Buddy, everything I see on screen tells me you're the nicest guy in the world. Maybe let Andrew start actually rageful so he can save MJ and go back to his universe having had his own arc. Toby is cute and even powerful as the dad of the group, but his great moments are all about how he helps the other Spider-Men. As Jake Peter taught us, even the older Spider-Man can learn things when meeting his counterparts. That's what makes Spider-Verse stories special. Without that, I just don't see how these are anything more than cameos. And that's all of Marvel's Phase 4 projects in 2021. But before we end part 1, the way the Spider-Men and their villains were treated in No Way Home really does encapsulate my issues with so many of the characters here. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Marvel needs people on staff who are literally obsessed with these characters. People who understand all of their appearances, how they've grown, where they were last time we saw them, what they've been doing in the meantime, how the current script plans to change them, and how that will affect their story going forward. I get that we're always trying to strike a balance with the artistic freedom of the writers and directors, so nothing should ever be set in stone. But at the end of the day, for better or worse, this is a continuous story. There's nothing else like the MCU in media right now, but it's most comparable to a TV show with a lot of seasons, the only other visual art form that features the same characters across a long narrative. And TV shows, good ones at least, are meticulous about their characters. If the MCU doesn't have the utmost respect and love for each and every one of their heroes, then what are we even doing here? I know it sounds silly, but I think that the reason the MCU is failing is because they haven't learned this lesson. These characters should be holy gospel. Every single project should read as a love letter to them. Every single time they appear, there should be so much thought going in, making sure their journey is being respected and, most importantly, built upon. Otherwise, it's just an SNL sketch. Take these characters seriously, Marvel. They built this franchise, and they're all you have. Thanks for watching. Why did I do thumbs? Don't put the thumbs in. Take that out.